Have you ever been left by someone and felt like the air got knocked out of you? Like your world split open and nothing made sense anymore? You replay every moment, every conversation, trying to find the exact second it all slipped through your fingers. You wonder, was I not enough? Did I love too hard or not hard enough? Let me tell you something that may shake your understanding. What if their leaving was never a loss, but a liberation? Most of us have been conditioned to believe that when someone walks away, we've been abandoned, discarded, defeated. But what if that narrative is entirely backward? What if the truth is this? They didn't break you, they freed you. Too many people confuse presence with value. Just because someone was there doesn't mean they added to your life. In fact, sometimes the most suffocating presence is someone who stays for the wrong reasons. And when they finally go, it feels like devastation. But what if that's exactly what you needed? What if the exit wasn't your ending, but your elevation? This is where Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes your armor. Because Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about mastering it. It's about recognizing that pain doesn't define you, but your response to it does. And in Stoic relationships, we stop chasing validation and start embodying value. We stop begging to be chosen, and we start choosing ourselves. In this video, we're about to challenge some deep-rooted myths, the ones that keep you stuck, waiting for closure, validation, or a text that never comes. You'll learn why treating their exit like a blessing is not just healing, it's transformative. You'll see how their absence isn't your weakness, it's your weapon. You'll walk through 6 undeniable truths about what they've lost, and how each one reveals the power you've just uncovered. And here's the real twist. By the end of this video, not only will you see their departure differently, you won't want them back. Not even a little. Because once you discover the depth of peace that comes from choosing yourself, you won't trade it for anyone who couldn't see your worth the first time. This isn't about payback. It's about presence, your presence. It's about stoicism, in action, not theory. And once you understand that, you become untouchable. You become the lesson they never saw coming. Stick with me to the end, because the final truth, it'll leave you looking at the past like a closed chapter and the future like a blank page begging for your pen. Let's begin. 1. Their absence spoke the truth. It's strange, isn't it? How the silence after someone leaves can roar louder than their voice ever did. You sit in the quiet and realize that everything you were afraid to admit to yourself when they were around is now screaming back at you. Their exit, painful as it felt, starts to unravel truths that had long been muffled by your desire to be loved, to be chosen. You remember how you used to shrink yourself just to keep them comfortable, how you silenced your own needs because you didn't want to seem too much. But now, in the echo of their absence, you finally hear yourself again. And what you hear isn't weakness. It's the voice of someone who has survived being overlooked, misunderstood, underappreciated. It's the voice of someone who stayed long after the affection faded, who gave more than they ever received, who chose love when the other person chose distance. That silence reveals everything. They were never the one. Because the right person doesn't leave you wondering, second-guessing, doubting your own worth. The right person sees you, not just the version of you that's easy to love, but the full, flawed, fiercely human version of you. Yet now, as you sit in that quiet space, you begin to see what was always there, but too painful to confront, that you were never truly seen. That their love came with conditions, with constraints, with limitations that you tried to mold yourself into. You tried to be perfect, to be enough, to be what they wanted. But in trying to fit into their frame, you lost the edges of yourself. Their absence removes the filter. No more guessing games. No more trying to read between the lines of their cold replies or distant eyes. Now it's all laid bare. They left. And that truth, while it hurt, is also a release. because now you're no longer stuck waiting for them to realize what they had. You realize it first. That's the foundation of Stoicism, not needing anyone to validate your worth. In Stoic relationships, truth is a gift, even when it arrives wrapped in heartbreak. So you start to rebuild, not because they come back begging or finally see your value, but because you see it without their permission. You see that their leaving had nothing to do with your lack and everything to do with their inability to receive the depth of what you offered. And here's the most powerful part. They thought they had the last word, but what they didn't realize is that your silence would become your strength. They thought their exit would break you, but instead, it's become your awakening. There is clarity in their absence, a clarity that you couldn't have found any other way. You remember those nights where your gut screamed something wasn't right, but you ignored it for love's sake. Now, that voice, the one that used to be a whisper, is a thunderous reminder that you were right all along, that you saw the red flags, but hoped your loyalty could turn them white, that you settled hoping they'd rise. But Stoicism teaches us not to attach ourselves to the outcomes we can't control, not to build our identity around the actions of others. Their absence showed you they were never meant to stay. They were a mirror reflecting all the ways you needed to heal, all the pieces of you that were still waiting for your own recognition. And now, every second of silence becomes sacred. It becomes the soil where new thoughts, new self-respect, new standards grow. You no longer need to check your phone, reread old messages, search for signs that they might return. Because you understand now, they were never the destination. They were the detour that brought you back to yourself. In that silence, you don't hear their name anymore. You hear your own, and it echoes not with sadness, but with a sense of rising. You stop asking, "Why didn't they love me?" and start asking, "Why did I ever think they could?" That's where your healing begins, in the recognition that their departure wasn't a reflection of your inadequacy, but a spotlight on their limitations. It's easy to believe that when someone walks away, they take a piece of you with them, but Stoicism tells us differently. They don't take anything you don't give, and once you decide to stop handing out pieces of yourself to people who can't hold them, you become whole again. That's the power of their absence. It forces you to sit with yourself long enough to remember who you are. It demands that you stop outsourcing your worth and start owning it. Their exit is the answer to the question you never dared to ask. What would my life look like if I stopped waiting for someone else to complete it? And the answer is this. It looks like freedom. It looks like self-trust. It looks like peace. Peace that doesn't need closure. Peace that doesn't need revenge. Peace that simply exists because you've decided that your healing matters more than their apology. You stop chasing, stop hoping, stop spinning in circles, trying to make sense of someone else's chaos. You step back and realize that the love you were giving them is the love you've always needed to give yourself. So let their absence speak. Let it roar. Let it teach. Let it become the anthem of your rebirth. Because one day they'll look around and realize the quiet is deafening. That the silence they created is now the loudest reminder of what they walked away from. And you'll be long gone. Not bitter, not broken, but better. Whole, steady, stoic. This is where your story shifts. This is where you stop being the one who was left behind and start becoming the one who rose in their absence. They thought you'd fall apart, but you found the truth. And in Stoic relationships, the truth always sets you free. Let their absence be your guidepost. Let it remind you that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Now you ask yourself, and you answer with love, with boundaries, with strength, with the kind of silence that speaks louder than any apology they'll never give. That's your power. And it began the moment they walked away. 2. You were the crown they dropped. They held something rare in their hands, and they let it fall. It wasn't because you weren't valuable, it was because they didn't know how to carry something that heavy, something that real. And here's the truth. When someone is offered a crown, it doesn't matter how shiny it is. If they've never seen royalty before, they might mistake it for a burden. They might drop it and walk away, thinking they're free, when in fact, they've just lost the very thing that could have elevated their life. That crown was you, your love, your patience, your loyalty, your quiet strength. But they didn't see it that way, did they? They saw your stability as predictability, your softness as weakness. And that's the mistake people make when they've never learned how to value something sacred. They assume that because something is consistent, it's disposable. They believe that if someone isn't loud about their worth, they must not have much of it. But Stoicism tells us something very different. It teaches us that true value doesn't need to shout, that real love is felt in silence, in presence, in peace. In Stoic relationships, worth is not something you demand. It's something you embody, and you did. You gave them something many people never get in this life, someone who saw their potential even when they couldn't, someone who stayed when they didn't deserve it, someone who wore the crown with grace and never asked to be worshipped, just respected, but they dropped it. They dropped you, and they thought they could find that same energy somewhere else, that someone else would carry the same balance of fire and gentleness. But you can't replace what's divine with something that's merely convenient. They'll search for it. They already are. They'll scroll, they'll swipe, they'll chase distractions and hollow connections that sparkle on the surface but hold no depth. And when the glitter fades and the noise quiets down, they'll remember. They'll remember you, not because you tried to make them, but because your absence will remind them of what they once had and couldn't handle. They'll realize that dropping the crown didn't make them lighter. It left them empty. Because you weren't just another person in their life. You were the one who brought structure to their chaos, stillness to their noise. And now, as you rebuild, as you rise, you no longer reach for validation from someone who was too small to carry your love. There's a sacred power in being underestimated. It gives you room to grow quietly, to evolve in the shadows, to rise without interruption. And now, as they look back, they won't recognize the person you've become, not because you changed to get over them, but because you grew into who you were always meant to be. They thought they could leave you in ruins, but you've turned those ruins into a kingdom. That's what happens when you realize your value doesn't shrink when someone fails to see it. It expands, it deepens, it becomes unshakable. And no, you're not bitter. That's the beauty of Stoicism. You don't need to seek revenge or explain your transformation. You simply live it. You wear your crown, not because you need anyone to bow, but because you've earned it. Because you've finally stopped lowering yourself to fit into spaces that couldn't hold you. Think back to how you waited, how you gave them chance after chance, how you tried to communicate, tried to make things work, how you softened your voice just to avoid conflict, how you prioritized their comfort over your own needs. That wasn't weakness, that was love. That was your capacity for grace. But they saw it as complacency. They confused your calm with lack of passion. What they didn't realize was that real royalty doesn't scream for attention. It holds the room in quiet confidence. You were always that. You were always the crown. And when they dropped you, it wasn't a reflection of your lack. It was a mirror of their inability to recognize what was in front of them. Now, you don't need that mirror anymore. You've seen yourself. You've stood in your own light. And in that light, you've realized something powerful. Their opinion no longer defines your worth. Their approval no longer feeds your soul, because now you choose yourself. Now you build a life that doesn't revolve around being chosen, but around being whole. That's where the shift happens. That's where healing begins. You no longer crave closure. You've created your own. You no longer wait at a closed door. You walk through one you built yourself. And every step away from them is a step back to you. The beauty of this transformation is that it's quiet. It doesn't require an audience. But here's the twist. They're watching. Maybe not publicly, maybe they'll never admit it, but they see you, they feel your glow, and that's not ego, it's energy. It's the reality that when someone loses access to your light, the darkness they're left in becomes their regret. That's the echo they sit with now. That's the truth they wrestle with in the stillness. And that's the cost of dropping a crown they were never ready to wear. So ask yourself this: who are you becoming now that you're no longer waiting to be seen? What does it feel like to walk through life without the weight of someone else's approval on your shoulders? That's freedom, that's strength, that's stoicism in action. It's not about suppressing emotion, it's about not being ruled by it. It's about standing tall even when the world tries to shake you. It's about recognizing that their leaving didn't end your story. It gave you the space to write a better one, and that's what you're doing now. One breath at a time, one bold decision at a time, one moment of grace for yourself In time, they dropped the crown. But you didn't break. You rebuilt, you rose, and now you wear it not because someone handed it to you, but because you forged it from every piece of pain, every shard of silence, every lesson you learned in the fire of heartbreak. That's what real royalty does. It reigns, not over others, but over itself. And you are reigning now in ways they'll never understand. Because while they were looking for comfort, you found courage. While they sought distraction, you found discipline. While they repeated cycles, you broke free. You became the person you always needed. You became whole. And now, if this message speaks to the royalty inside you, if you know you're stepping into your crown and ready to leave the past in ashes, do something powerful. Like this video and comment number 1 if you felt this. Truth deep in your soul. Let others know they're not alone in this journey. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because we're not just healing here. We're building thrones, one story at a time. 3. They chased glitter, let go of gold. You have to wonder sometimes, what exactly are people looking for when they walk away from something real, from loyalty, depth, truth? Why would anyone leave behind the kind of love that doesn't just decorate your life, but anchors it? Here's what they don't tell you. Not everyone is ready for real. Not everyone is equipped to handle something rooted, something timeless, something that doesn't need to perform to prove its worth. They want sparkle, not substance. They want stimulation, not stillness. And so, when you showed up as gold, unpolished, but priceless, they saw something ordinary because they lacked the eyes to recognize value that wasn't screaming for attention. They walked away chasing glitter, and in doing so, they lost something irreplaceable. You. You weren't perfect, you weren't flashy, but you were steady. You were the person who remembered the small things, who cared deeply, who stayed present, even when it was hard. You were the one who loved with consistency when everyone else was obsessed with novelty. And that's what makes this truth so hard to swallow. You didn't lose them. They lost you. They weren't pushed away. They wandered off, thinking the grass would be greener, thinking temporary thrills would bring them more joy than the grounded love you offered with both hands. But love isn't a firework. It's a flame. And the glitter they chased, it was loud, it was exciting, but it burned out fast, didn't it? Stoicism teaches us not to mourn what was never truly ours, not to cling to illusions. And this was exactly that, an illusion. The illusion that if you love someone hard enough, they'll stay. The illusion that if you keep giving, they'll eventually see. But people don't change because of your love. They change when they're ready, and some people, they'd rather keep running from their own reflection than sit with someone who sees them too clearly. You saw them, you accepted them, you were patient with their flaws, generous with your energy. But they wanted something easier, not deeper, easier. Something that looked good but required nothing of them. And now as the glitter fades and the shine wears off, they're starting to feel it. the emptiness, the absence of real connection, the ache that comes when distraction no longer works. This is the consequence of chasing illusions. Eventually, the truth catches up, because nothing and no one can replace someone who gave from the soul. No one can duplicate the safety you created, the way you listened, the way you stayed. They'll try, they'll rebound, they'll copy and paste emotions onto someone else. But it won't stick, it never does. Because you weren't just an experience, you were a sanctuary, and sanctuaries don't scream. They stand still and sacred, waiting to be recognized. So when they ran after loudness, they mistook silence for insignificance. But now they know. It's not the noise you miss, it's the peace, and you were peace. Now here's the shift you're making. You no longer carry the weight of their poor decisions. You no longer internalize their inability to stay. Stoic relationships are built on the truth that your worth is not dependent on someone else's ability to see it. You were gold whether they held you or not. You shine with or without their validation, and just because they walked away doesn't mean you have to chase them. You're not lost. You're not lacking. You're just not in the business of selling yourself short anymore. Think about what you gave. Loyalty that didn't flinch, love that didn't judge, presence that didn't leave. You were there. You were consistent. You were the kind of person who doesn't come around twice. And while they thought they were upgrading, all they really did was opt out of real growth. Because being loved by someone like you, that's not easy. It requires maturity. It requires showing up. And not everyone is ready to be seen that deeply, held that honestly. So they run, and in doing so, they betray not just you, but themselves. They walk away from their own evolution, and they don't even realize it until it's too late. It's easy to think you need closure, an apology, an explanation, but you don't. The closure is in the facts. They chose glitter, you were gold. They saw temporary appeal, you were timeless substance. You gave more than you should have, hoped longer than you needed to. But you're done now, done waiting. Done explaining, done trying to make someone see what they weren't ready to understand. Your silence is your boundary, your peace is your proof, and their regret, that's their mirror, not your burden. The most powerful thing you can do is live well, not to make them regret. But because you're finally done shrinking, you're done bending to fit into frames that don't match your picture. And in Stoic fashion, you no longer need to announce your growth. It announces itself in your glow, in your clarity, in your unshakable peace. The people who chase glitter rarely stop to ask themselves what they're really running from. But you've asked, you've answered, and now you're rising. You're building something they'll never have access to again, not because you're bitter, but because you're healed. Because once someone shows you they don't know how to value your presence, it becomes your responsibility to value your absence. They thought love was supposed to entertain them, but you were never entertainment. You were the anchor, the foundation, the calm. And now, in the storm of their shallow choices, they'll remember you, not as a mistake, but as the moment they lost something unrepeatable. Let that memory do the work. Let their journey teach them what yours already has. That real doesn't shout. It stands firm. It waits to be seen. And once it's gone, it doesn't return. And you don't need to return either. You just need to keep walking. Because every step you take now is a step away from illusion and toward integrity, from fantasy to fulfillment. You've been the gold all along. And now you know it. That is enough. That is everything. That is freedom. 4. You became the plot twist. They thought they had it all figured out. They assumed they knew how your story would go. You'd break, beg, maybe even chase. They expected tears, apologies, and maybe one last attempt to hold on. That's what they counted on. That you'd stay predictable, that you'd remain where they left you. But what they didn't anticipate, what they never saw coming, was that you would become the plot twist. Not by force, not by revenge, but by evolving into someone even you didn't know you were capable of becoming. This wasn't part of their plan. This wasn't the ending they wrote in their head. They imagined a future where they'd come back. And you'd still be there, waiting, aching. But instead of breaking down, you broke through. That's the beauty of Stoicism. It teaches us that our greatest strength doesn't come from what happens to us, but how we respond. In Stoic Relationships, when someone walks away, we don't chase, we rise. You didn't rewrite the story with rage, you didn't retaliate, you simply transformed. You turned your silence into strategy, your pain into purpose, your grief into growth. And now, while they're flipping back through old chapters, wondering how they misread the signs, you're already deep into a new book, one they're no longer written into. It's hard to grasp at first, isn't it? That someone you gave your heart to, who once knew your routines, your laugh, your fears, can become just a character in your origin story. But that's the reality of emotional growth. You outgrow the spaces that couldn't hold you. You evolve. Beyond the stories that kept you small, you realize that love isn't about who stays, it's about who shows up fully. And they didn't. They assumed access to you was eternal. They assumed they could disappear and return without consequences. But you've changed the narrative. You've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening doors. Sometimes it means closing them with grace, locking them with wisdom, and walking away with power. Now they're the ones watching, from a distance, quietly. They see the glow they didn't appreciate. They feel the peace they once took for granted. They witness your growth and wonder how the one they left behind became the one they can't forget. And the irony? It's not even about you anymore. It's about what they gave up. Because you're not just someone who loved them. You were the version of themselves they were too afraid to rise into. You were the reminder that love demands depth, and they weren't ready to dive. So they stayed on the surface, while you sank into your soul and surfaced stronger. In this life, people don't always recognize the turning points when they're in them. They only understand them in hindsight. And you were the turning point. You were the person who would have built with them, healed with them, grown beside them. But they chose otherwise. They chose comfort over courage. They chose patterns over presence. And now they live with the echo of what could have been. That's not your burden. That's their lesson. You were the one they underestimated, the one they misread, the one they believed would never leave. And yet, here you are, not just gone, but transformed. Let's pause and acknowledge something important. Your strength isn't in pretending it didn't hurt. It's in embracing the pain and choosing to move through it anyway. It's in letting go without losing yourself. It's in trusting that what's meant for you will never require you to abandon your truth. That's Stoicism in action. Not apathy, but alignment. Not indifference, but integrity. You held space for someone who couldn't hold it for you. And now, instead of shrinking, you're expanding, you're becoming. They thought you were just a chapter, but you were the climax, the shift, the twist that changed everything. And now they're stuck in the loop of their own choices, while you're busy writing new pages filled with peace, purpose, and passion. Think about that. How many people get the chance to rewrite themselves this way? To turn heartbreak into a higher self? To turn loss into liberation? You didn't ask for this pain, but you honored it. You didn't deserve the confusion, but you found clarity in it. That's the plot twist they never saw coming. Not because you became someone else, but because you became more of yourself. And while they're still cycling through the same old patterns, trying to fill the void with distractions and placeholders, you've learned how to be whole. You've stopped outsourcing your joy. You've stopped waiting for closure. You are the closure, your presence, your evolution, your refusal to stay where you were not valued. That is the full stop at the end of their sentence. And now, your life continues, punctuated not by their absence, but by your arrival. Back to yourself, back to your worth, back to the version of you that doesn't ask for love. It attracts it by being whole. Let's be real. There will be moments when you remember, when a song plays or a memory flickers. That's human, but it doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're healing, and healing isn't a straight line, it's a sacred process, one that you've committed to with grace and grit. So no, you don't go back, you don't rewind the story, because the version of you that loved them, that version deserved better. And now, you're the one who gives it. If you've made it this far and you feel this story in your soul, if you recognize yourself in these words, then you know exactly what to do. Like this video and comment number 1 if you felt the shift inside you. This is not just another message, it's your reminder, your affirmation that you are not the one who lost, you are the one who was found. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell, here is a reminder that your pain has purpose, your growth has meaning, and your voice is not silent, it's sacred. 5. Your growth became their ghost. There comes a moment when everything you went through begins to make sense, not because it didn't hurt, not because the confusion magically dissolves, but because you finally see the role it played in your transformation. And in that clarity, you start to understand that healing doesn't always feel like peace at first. It feels like power. It feels like rising in silence while the world expects you to stay broken. That silence, that evolution, that unannounced self-restoration, that's what becomes their ghost. It's not that you intended to haunt them. It's that your absence became louder than your presence ever was. And not because you raised your voice, but because you withdrew it. Not because you explained what they lost, but because you stopped trying to. It's strange how that happens, isn't it? How the person who thought you'd never leave is now the one replaying the silence you left behind. They expected you to stay small, to stay hurt, to stay reachable. But Stoicism doesn't allow for stagnation. Stoic relationships demand evolution, independent of the ones who couldn't evolve with you. When you stopped trying to be heard, when you chose peace over performance, that's when the shift occurred. That's when your growth began to speak for itself. And now, while they scroll, while they sit with their distractions, trying to mask the dull ache of something missing, that ghost isn't bitterness. It's the version of you they couldn't hold. The version of you they weren't prepared to support. The version of you that no longer asks, no longer waits, no longer looks back. You see, people often assume that the loudest revenge is revenge itself. But it's not. The loudest revenge is reinvention. It's doing the inner work so quietly, so consistently, that one day you wake up and no longer crave the apology, no longer need the closure, no longer flinch at the memory. And when they reach out, not always with words, but through energy, through awkward likes, through sudden memories, they won't be reaching for the same person. They'll be reaching for a ghost, a memory, a could have been that no longer fits the person you've become. That's the cost of mishandling someone real. You don't just lose them, you lose every version of them you could have known. Let's be honest. This isn't just about them, it's about you. It's about the work you've done when no one was watching, the nights you sat in your own stillness, choosing growth over gossip, reflection over resentment. It's about how you've stopped responding to things that don't deserve your energy, how your boundaries are no longer a threat to anyone, they're a sanctuary for yourself. And that shift, that sacred elevation, that's what lingers now, that's what whispers to them at night. It's not your anger, it's your evolution. Not your pain, but your peace. Imagine being the one who once gave endlessly, who stayed even when staying hurt, who forgave before being asked, and then waking up to realize you've outgrown the role of the rescuer. You've outgrown the narrative where you had to fix people to feel valuable. That's the old version of you, the one they knew, the one they assumed would always be waiting. But this new version, this grounded, graceful, fiercely self-aware version, they never met that person, and they never will, Because once you've risen into your own worth, once you've realigned with your own purpose, you stop returning to the places that taught you to abandon yourself. They thought time would give them space to return. But what time gave you was perspective. And with that perspective, you didn't just move on, you moved up. And that movement, that rise, is something they feel but can't reach. That's the haunting. That's the ghost. Because you didn't disappear out of spite. You didn't cut them off with cruelty. You simply healed beyond the point of needing to be understood. And in doing that, you became the reflection they can't avoid. Not because you're following them, but because your energy, your essence, your presence is imprinted on the version of their life where they still hadn't ruined the bridge. They'll try to recreate it, not directly but subtly. They'll mimic the dynamic with someone new, thinking maybe they can recreate the same comfort, the same safety. But it won't work, because it wasn't just the dynamic, it was you. It was your presence, your patience, your soul. That's what can't be duplicated. And that's what Stoicism shows us. The rarest kind of peace is the one that doesn't chase, doesn't compare, doesn't return. It simply becomes. And now you've become something they never anticipated. The lesson they couldn't learn, in your presence, now echoing in your absence. Think about how far you've come, from doubting your worth to declaring it silently, from needing to be chosen to choosing yourself, from explaining your heart to protecting it. That's not just healing, that's elevation, that's legacy. And legacies don't require validation. They simply endure. And while they continue to look back, unsure of how to fill the space where your consistency once stood, you are moving forward. Sure of one thing, you are no longer willing to bleed for someone who couldn't bandage you. That's power. That's stoicism embodied. There will be days when the ghost feels like it's haunting you too. Moments when memories rise uninvited, when doubt tries to crawl back in. But that's not regression. That's a reminder. A reminder of what you've overcome, of what you've rebuilt, of the peace you chose when chaos was an option. And in those moments, you hold fast to your truth, that they didn't just lose someone to talk to. They lost someone who would have walked with them through anything. And now they walk alone, not because you wished it on them, but because they chose it. Maybe not consciously, maybe not maliciously, but choices have echoes. And yours have led you here, to a life no longer defined by who stayed or who left, but by who you became in the aftermath. And so your growth, quiet, unrelenting, undeniable, becomes the ghost. It becomes the truth they can't silence, the shadow they can't shake, because the most haunting thing isn't being forgotten. It's being remembered for everything someone wasn't ready to receive. And now that's who you are to them. Not a name, not a message, not a presence, a realization, one that won't let them sleep in the comfort of denial. Because in every decision they make, in every new face that doesn't feel the same, in every moment they think back and wonder, what if they're haunted, not by you, but by the opportunity they fumbled, by the gold they mistook for glitter, by the plot twist they didn't predict, by the crown they dropped, and above all, by the growth they never imagined you'd reach. 6. The garden they ignored now blooms without them. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from being overlooked, not for a lack of presence, but for a lack of recognition. You were always there. You showed up, you poured your energy, you gave your time, your care, your loyalty. You became the kind of love that nurtures, that sees, that sustains. And yet they couldn't see the garden growing at their feet. They walked by it every day, distracted by weeds that sparkled under the wrong kind of light, chasing temporary beauty instead of investing in the roots that were right in front of them. That garden was you. The one they ignored, the one they failed to water, the one they assumed would always be there, blooming, waiting, forgiving. But Stoicism teaches us something sacred. We are not here to be kept on standby. We are not here to prove our worth through endless endurance. We are not here to pour water into someone else's desert while our own soil dries up. And now you've stopped. You've stopped tending to the places that never poured back into you. You've stopped trying to grow love where only neglect was sown. And something remarkable happened when you stopped chasing their attention. Your garden started blooming again, not for them, for you. Because the moment you reclaimed your energy, you began to flourish. The roots they took for granted grew deeper. The blossoms they never noticed began to stretch toward the sun, no longer waiting for permission. And now, from the distance they created, they're watching something they once had complete access to become unreachable. Not out of malice, not out of revenge, but out of growth. Because the truth is, they had every chance. They had all the time they needed to step into your space, to meet you halfway, to see you fully. But instead, they chose detachment. They chose distraction. They chose everywhere but here. You were the steady hand in a chaotic world, the one who stayed through storms, who believed through silence, who loved even when love wasn't returned in equal measure. And now they're realizing what they walked away from wasn't just love. It was soil, it was soul, it was safety. Because real love doesn't just make things beautiful, it makes them grow. And you were the environment they never appreciated, until they stepped into barren ground elsewhere. That's the hardest lesson for them now, the realization that you weren't asking for too much. You were giving too much to someone who gave too little. And now that you've stepped away, their world feels a little less vibrant, a little less alive, because you're not in it. They'll try to find it again, that feeling, that peace, that grounding energy. But Stoic relationships don't duplicate. They transform. You don't replace someone who truly gave from their core. You don't mimic that kind of care. You feel its absence. You live with its loss. And now they are, quietly, internally, in ways they may never admit aloud. Every time they see someone who looks like you, who laughs like you, who offers them even a sliver of familiarity, they're reminded, not just of you, but of what they could have had, if only they'd stayed, if only they'd seen. But you've stopped waiting to be seen. You've stopped blooming for anyone who won't sit and appreciate your shade. You've taken the very energy they ignored and used it to create a life they can't access. Think of it. All the nights you lay awake, wondering what more you could have done. All the times you questioned your worth because they treated your presence like background noise. All the tears, all the inner debates, all the forgiveness you extended without it ever being asked for. None of that was in vain, because all of it fertilized the garden that is you now, and they can't walk through it anymore. Not because you've become bitter, but because you've built boundaries, because you've realized that self-love is not a rebellion, it's a return to yourself. A return to the knowing that you were never meant to shrink to fit someone else's capacity. And now that garden, once ignored, once misunderstood, is flourishing. Wild, unapologetic, alive. You no longer need someone to validate your bloom. You no longer seek sunlight from someone who brought only shade. And that shift, that deep, unshakable alignment with your own worth, is what they feel now. That's what lingers in their quietest moments. That's what echoes when they scroll through memories, wondering how you slipped through their fingers. They thought the garden would wait. They thought it would stay the same. But you grew, you expanded, you became, and the most powerful part, you didn't need them to wither for you to thrive. You just needed to remember that your growth was never tied to their recognition. It was always yours, always sacred, always ready to rise, the moment you stopped asking someone else to nurture what they didn't plant. Stoicism tells us to accept what we cannot control and to master what we can. And you've done just that. You've mastered your energy, you've mastered your boundaries, you've mastered the art of giving without depleting. And now, as they look on, unsure of what happened, trying to retrace the missteps, they'll find no trail because you're not where they left you. You're not waiting, you're not paused. You're present, fully. There's a moment for everyone who walks away from something real when they realize it wasn't about needing more. It was about not recognizing what they already had. And by the time that realization hits, the garden they once ignored has become a forest of strength, too vast to contain, too evolved to revisit. Let them chase illusions. Let them try to plant roots in soil that can't sustain depth. That's not your concern anymore. Because now you're rooted. Now you're radiant. Now you're no longer trying to prove that you're worth staying. For you are simply being. And in your being you become the reminder. Not because you speak it, but because your peace lives it. If you've felt the shift, if you've recognized your garden and stopped waiting for someone else to tend it, then let this be your moment. Like this video and comment number 1. If this part of your journey resonated with you, let others know they're not alone in this healing. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, because this is more than content. It's a movement. It's a reclamation. It's the living proof that when they ignore your growth, it only gives you space to thrive, and thrive you will. This was never about what they lost. It was always about what you found. In every step they took away from you, there was a step waiting to return you to yourself. They thought they were walking away from something temporary, from something replaceable. But what they failed to grasp is that they weren't leaving behind a moment. They were leaving behind a force. And now that force has risen, quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to be defined by what leaves, but to be refined by what remains. And what remained in you was strength, clarity, self-worth. The kind that doesn't beg to be seen, the kind that doesn't fracture under the weight of someone else's indecision. This story was never theirs to narrate. It was always yours to own, and now you do, with every breath that no longer waits, with every boundary that no longer bends, with every moment you stand still and realize that you are not a chapter, they are. You are not a detour, they were. Your life does not orbit around the ones who fail to stay. It ascends in spite of them. You are no longer defined by who chose not to grow with you. You're defined by who you chose to become because of it. And if you've come this far, it means something in this story echoed within you. Maybe it reminded you of your own quiet victories. Maybe it stirred the memory of a pain you thought you buried. Maybe it simply spoke truth in a language your heart had been waiting to hear. Let that truth anchor you. Let it be the calm in the storm, the stillness in the spin, the reminder that you were always enough, and you always will be. You are the calm they mistook for boredom, the depth they thought was heavy, the love they weren't ready to carry. And now your silence says what your words no longer need to. You have risen. You have become. You are free. And in Stoic relationships, that is the highest form of power. Not to win someone back, but to never need them again. Let them feel the absence. You feel the ascent. This is your story now. Carry it well. Carry it whole. Carry it forward.